there you have Leslie Earhart with the TBI saying that they're, still pursuing several scenarios, including foul play and the very real possibility that Summer Wells wandered off and got lost.
She said it could be foul play, and she said it could be that the child simply wandered off and became lost in rough, unforgiving terrain. That double possibility, announced by the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, is the single clearest signal we have. Investigators are treating this as a case that could go many ways, and they are not ruling anything out. If you watch this channel and want to follow verified developments, hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell now so you don't miss updates as they come. The TBI's public statements matter because they frame what detectives are testing behind the scenes. When an agency names two very different scenarios, deliberate harm and accidental wandering, it tells us two things at once. First, it tells the community that investigators are keeping an open playbook. They are collecting evidence for multiple legal paths and not allowing an early narrative to lock them into a single explanation. Second, it tells us there is enough uncertainty in the material investigators have that neither scenario can be confidently excluded. That uncertainty shapes everything from search priorities to how officers interview witnesses and how evidence is preserved. When a senior investigator names wandering into the woods as a very real possibility, that language has weight. It isn't thrown around casually. Search and rescue teams, behavioral analysts, and forensic staff use specific words because those words change operational choices. If wandering is plausible, the next steps include renewed terrain searches, specialized tracking dogs, revisit of watercourses and ravines, revisiting overlooked structures such as sheds and culverts, and deploying ground-penetrating radar or cadaver detection dogs to places that standard searches may have missed. Conversely, when foul play is considered, that shifts resources toward canvassing for surveillance, re-evaluating phone and vehicle records, re-interviewing everyone who was in the child's orbit that day, and treating potential scenes as discrete crime scenes even if they initially looked like an ordinary residential yard. Experienced investigators will tell you that the two scenarios are not always mutually exclusive. A child who wanders and becomes disoriented can become vulnerable to a predator. A deliberate abductor might choose a remote spot knowing the terrain offers concealment. The TBI's naming of both possibilities signals they are collecting evidence along both lines of inquiry, testing soil samples for foreign DNA, checking for signs of disturbance near likely paths, and re-examining witness statements for small inconsistencies or corroborative details. Agency language is often the first public window into the investigative posture. When officials choose to call wandering a very real possibility, they are telling other agencies, search teams, and the public what to prioritize. It also sends a message to people with potential knowledge. If you think the child may have moved into a certain ravine, field, or creek, that detail could help. But it also has a cost. It can fuel lay speculation in online forums, where people interpret cautious phrasing as confirmation of guilt or cover-up. That's why the TBI balances transparency with restraint, offering enough to guide the public without revealing investigative tactics or prematurely narrowing the focus. Another senior voice suggested that if the child were found alive, she might well be closer to the home than people assume. That kind of remark springs from field experience. In many missing child cases, the eventual location is not some remote highway but within walking distance or in a terrain pocket overlooked in early searches. Dense brush, sudden drop-offs, and an ambiguous creek can create microenvironments where scent dissipates and where search dogs and drones can miss a small child who's collapsed or hidden. That's why investigators often return, methodically and with fresh tools, to research seemingly covered ground. A complicating factor the speaker raised is caregiver impairment. Reports and rumors about intoxication or other impairment in the adults present that day complicate the timeline. If caregivers were impaired or distracted, children might have been left unsupervised for a longer period than was initially reported. That raises a legal question. If negligence is proven, if caregivers were intoxicated or otherwise unable to supervise, it could lead to criminal charges such as negligent homicide if wandering turned fatal, or criminal neglect. Those are serious legal designations, and investigators will only pursue them if physical evidence and corroborated timelines support them. The legal distinction matters. An accidental death caused by neglect has a different factual and prosecutorial profile than a deliberate abduction. Proving neglect requires showing a standard of care was breached and that the breach led to the fatal outcome. Proving deliberate harm requires evidence of intent, planning, or direct action by another person. That's why investigators gather everything: phone records to show who was where and when, vehicle GPS to establish movements, witness statements to reconstruct who last saw the child, and forensic traces to indicate whether another person was present on site. There are, of course, darker alternatives under consideration in public discussion: intentional harm, concealment, or the unthinkable idea of a child being sold or trafficked. Those remain speculative until corroborated by evidence. The job of detectives is to follow the leads that can be tested: DNA, fiber, digital footprints, not the imaginative elaborations of online commenters. Still, the presence of these hypotheses in public debate underlines why investigators must be both cautious and thorough. The community's emotional need for answers tends to create multiple competing narratives, and it's the investigator's task to convert claims into corroborated facts or reject them through controlled tests. The tone of the public commentary contained in recent recordings is consequential. The speaker of the clip you heard repeatedly expressed a belief that the child is likely no longer alive. That belief, whether formed from private information or cumulative frustration, changes the tone of public discussion and raises the emotional stakes for everyone involved: investigators, family members, and the community. Investigators must absorb that public feeling while maintaining forensic discipline. Declarations of certainty from spokespeople, even family members, do not replace material evidence. They do, however, affect the urgency of investigative actions, the allocation of resources, and the pressure agencies feel from politically charged or viral public attention. Because this topic attracts strong feelings, you'll often see social media threads that mix case analysis with unrelated political commentary. The digression into governance and politics distracts from the forensic tasks at hand. Investigations proceed through careful steps: identify, preserve, test, and corroborate. Politics belongs in oversight and accountability. It doesn't produce trace evidence. The most effective public contribution is not commentary about unrelated political matters but tips anchored in verifiable details: dates, times, specific observations, photos with metadata. That's what investigators can use. What should listeners take from this careful, sometimes grim distillation? First, that the TBI is not limiting its options. They are methodically testing both foul play and the possibility of accidental wandering. That approach means re-evaluating terrain, revisiting witness statements, and using new forensic techniques where appropriate. Second, that caregiver conduct is an investigatory focus for good reason. Supervisory lapses can turn a routine afternoon into tragedy. Third, that public statements of belief, however heartfelt, are not a substitute for admissible evidence. Evidence must be preserved, documented, and analyzed by experts before prosecutors can proceed. Finally, in this kind of case, the public has an important but specific role: help by sharing verifiable information, not by amplifying untested claims. If you heard something about a particular location, a vehicle, a person who was unusually near the property that day, text or call the tip lines law enforcement has established. If you have photos or videos from that date, preserve them with timestamps and metadata. Avoid reposting sensational claims that have not been corroborated. The best help is the kind that yields testable evidence. This is a long, painful process. Cases like this test community patience, law enforcement focus, and journalistic ethics. But they also reveal what must be done: re-examine the ground, re-interview witnesses under controlled conditions, cross-check digital records, run forensic tests, and keep the public informed in ways that help rather than inflame. The truth, whether it points to tragedy in the woods, a lapse of care, or something more sinister, will only be secured through slow, exacting work. We will continue to monitor developments and bring verified updates as investigators release them. If you have specific, verifiable information about June 15, 2021, a time-stamped photo, a vehicle description, or a first-hand observation tied to an exact time and place, report it to law enforcement rather than posting it to social media. The TBI and local agencies are the channels equipped to turn those tips into evidence that can be tested in a lab and used in court. In closing, the case remains open and active, and the dual path the investigators are following reflects both the tragic possibilities and the methodical care that this investigation requires. We owe it to the missing child, to her family, and to the community to push for answers with patience, precision, and respect for the facts. Keep watching for updates, stay grounded in verifiable information, and if you can help, contact the official tip lines with concrete evidence rather than conjecture.